everyone. Welcome or welcome back to our Green Code series. My name is Mapendo Tumaini, and I'm interning with Preservation Buffalo Niagara as the lead of this amazing series. A little bit about me is that I am majoring in urban and regional planning over at Buffalo State University, and I will be graduating soon, very soon in May. Thank you so much for joining us today. For part two, we're joined with Bernice Radle, the Executive Director of TBN, and Haley Hartman, Construction Manager. Thank you so much for joining us today. Enjoy and learn a lot.
Okay, thank you, Mapendo.
Thanks, Mapendo.
I'm going to share my screen really quickly. My name is Bernice Radle. As you all probably know, I am the Executive Director here at Preservation Buffalo Niagara. And I'm actually joined by Haley. We're in the same room together with our beautiful arched window here at the office. This is Haley, who is an amazing construction manager, real estate agent. We've worked together on so many projects over the years, and too many to count, too much trouble, good trouble over the years. So what I wanted
happy to be here.
Thanks, Haley. What I wanted to do today is do a follow-up to Chris Hawley's part one, which was all about what the Green Code, what did we want to accomplish with the Green Code? What rules did we set in place with the Green Code? This part two is about implementation of the Green Code, and really what we wanted to accomplish something with it by setting all these rules, but now let's show the actual reality, the results of the Green Code in action. And so I put together a couple of examples and a couple of thoughts in a short presentation. And I will share those, and Haley and I will basically go back and forth and kind of share our thoughts. But the goal today is for people listening to understand how to use the Green Code to your benefit for small scale historic buildings all across Buffalo, New York. And, whether you're a realtor like Haley or a renovator like me and Haley, right, we need to know the zoning code. The zoning code is the DNA of our city, and it's the rules to which we can do work, right?
Yep.
So I wanted to start real quick. This is a photo of the day that the Green Code was passed. It was sometime in January, I think it was January, I forget the date, January 2017, the Green Code was passed. We had worked on the Green Code for 6 years. And, it's very important to understand that we wanted a very good, strong code that supported historic preservation and supported the city and our walkable historic neighborhoods. And really the Green Code did it. And I will say, I have served on several boards around zoning. So the Form-Based Code Institute, I served on for several years, where I would review codes around the country, and Buffalo's zoning code is still the best and the strongest that has passed. I have seen. I mean, I have seen. I haven't read every code, but it's because it's focused on what we're going to talk about today and what we learned in part one with Chris, the removing minimum parking, supporting our historic buildings, allowing, accessory dwelling units, adaptive reuse. Yes, exactly. So I wanted to share this photo of us celebrating that day when we were there. And of course, the Green Code is all about embracing small scale historic buildings. And these were photos that I just had on my collection over the years, but every single one of these buildings in this that you see in these photos were illegal under our old code. Our old code said it needed to be suburban, it needed to be parking lots in the front. Everything had to have parking with it. But all of our buildings are beautiful historic buildings. They don't have parking lots, right? They're walkable, they're more dense. So what happened was they were all illegal for 50 plus years. And then with the switch of the Green Code, all of these buildings became legal again. Now you could actually renovate them, you could love them, you could cherish them, you could finance them, which is huge. We'll talk about that in a second. But these all started to make sense. And that's only from 2017 till today. So I wanted to focus on 3 things, which in the part one, Chris really focused on, kind of the broad brushes of the Green Code, but I wanted to dive into 3 things today that really help support historic preservation you know, the Green Code really supports historic preservation and vice versa. So I really wanted to, what I wanted to start with was that in the Green Code, there's a legacy shops provision. It's 6.1.1.f in the Green Code, where it's like a beautiful little paragraph. And basically, all around Buffalo, we see this, especially on the eve of what's about to be Easter and Dingus Day. We have all of these beautiful old taverns that have closed on the east side. We have on the west side, we have buildings that have these great old shops that were, you know, candy stores 100 years ago, et cetera. Well, the legacy shops provision in the Green Code basically allows for these buildings to come back to life again. And that's a big deal. That's a huge deal. And so I actually put a picture here of Eugene V. Debs Hall at 483 Peckham Street, which both Haley and I worked on in the middle of COVID. We worked on it, and we cleaned this baby out. We helped Chris get the loan. We, you know, worked on the renovation. We thought through the shop needs, etc. And but none of that would have been possible. And under the old code, it would have needed a whole parking lot because it's a bar, and it wouldn't have been possible because it's a legacy shop, and the legacy shops, these were illegal under the old code.
And I think what is really special about this, you know, Bernice talks about what a big deal it is, but I think that it's important to understand that without this provision, these wouldn't be able to exist and really kind of raise up the neighborhood around them. They're doing so much good for the little pockets of the communities that they exist in. You know, it's so positive to have business owners in the middle of a residential area, because business owners are there all day long, you know, in business hours, keeping an eye on things. They're seeing that your dog got loose and you're not home at work. You know, they're noticing that somebody threw some trash on the side of the road that needs to be picked up. And all of those things are really positive for communities. So being able to bring businesses back into really dense residential urban areas is just such a good thing for the people who live there. So it's not only great for developers like Chris, who is able to make an amazing space that the community enjoys just as a space for itself, but he's doing a lot just for his pocket of the community as well.
Yeah. And planting, you know, dozens and dozens of trees and helping that this is where the block club meets, like all of those good things. And none of it would be possible without the zoning code change, right? Because you don't need a parking lot anymore. The minimum parking requirements are gone. And the legacy shops provision allows for this building to exist again. And that is so special. And I really encourage as you're watching this, think about all the shops that you've seen across Buffalo that are still vacant, you know, and they usually have apartments above them. So they're great little, you know, like kind of, they could be affordable housing, like naturally affordable apartments, couple of cute apartments above, a great little shop below, and be a real asset.
And from a real estate perspective, it's also really positive for appraisal values in the area. You know, we had to work really hard to make the bank understand that in this particular instance, Eugene V. Debs Hall was kind of a little bit of a new concept for the banker to wrap their minds around. But now there's a great comp, and that is awesome for residential and commercial building owners in that neighborhood, that they have a high value building right in their community.
Absolutely. I wanted to show one more example of legacy shops. We could show you dozens of these, but one that actually Preservation Buffalo Niagara is very interested in right now is 840 William, which this is kind of a gloomy photo. I took it at dusk, you know, a couple weeks ago. But 840 William, if you look, actually this has a huge brewing history and used to be a Schlitz brewing beer space, and has apartments above. And this is vacant and actually caught up in some estate issues right now that we're trying to untangle. But you know, the point is these exist all over the place. And this is right around the corner actually from Debs Hall. And as you just said, there's a comp in the area. So now we don't need a parking lot. The shops can get reopened if we want. And now that Debs Hall has existed for a couple of years, realtors and bankers will look favorably at this and then it will make some financial sense.
Yeah.
You know,
and I know that this isn't like the broad point of doing these projects, but just a small point here is to say how much better this is going to be for the tenants who live in upstairs in the future than having this like awkward kind of forced first floor apartment that has to exist because it's the only legal use of that building.
Yes.
You know, it's not going to make a great apartment. So it's not going to make great neighbors. And now these upstairs tenants who can now have a lovely apartment with a downstairs first floor commercial tenant, that's just going to be a building that works so much better for the business
Absolutely.
owner and for the people who live there.
Yeah, see, she knows what she's talking about, Haley. Absolutely agree. And we didn't talk about the other thing, which is building wealth. So local wealth being built in the community. So as a local owner can take this on and buy it and renovate it, right? They're building their wealth, right? Their multi-generational wealth, passing that on to their kids. And you know, the other option really is demolition, and demolition doesn't pay taxes, right? The vacant lots don't pay a lot of money in taxes. And this would cost $30,000-$40,000 to demolish, if not more. And that's a real shame. That's a loss of value instead of adding value.
Yeah.
So these legacy shops are so important. I think they're where dreams come true.
Yeah.
That's right.
And just like so much character for our city.
Yeah. So we're going to go on to what I'm saying, no parking, no problem. You heard me talk about, and in part one, Chris talked about removing minimum parking requirements, but I wanted to show you an example of PBN's working on, and then also an example that Haley just finished up that had some that didn't require parking, and how important it is to historic preservation. So this is 72 Sycamore. It has a wild, amazing history we've written lots of articles on. You can go do some research, but 72 Sycamore is a building that we own that we're just starting to renovate now. We're working on, we just got a window quote this week. And our architectural drawings and stuff are all wrapped up. So we're moving forward. But the point is, this really kind of cool downtown building does not have a parking lot at all, right? There's no parking. Now there is a vacant lot to the left, but we're going to actually use it for more community space. We're not planning on having a parking lot. And guess what? That's okay under the new code, right? The new code says, hey, you're going to have people here. Yeah, you're going to have offices. You don't have to have a parking lot anymore. You don't have to knock down an entire building to make parking for your other building. And that's really important.
And lose the opportunity for that community space.
Exactly. And lose the opportunity for the community. And so we're working on this. And you know, the people say, well, where do you park? Well, we're sitting in the Market Arcade right now, and there's no parking lot here either. Where did they park? We parked outside on the street.
I'm pretty much right out front.
Yeah. So it's fine, you know, there'll probably be 9 or 10 people in this building, and there's definitely, 9 or 10 spots, and people bike and they walk and they find their way. We bus and bike all the time.
I make it work in a full-size pickup truck.
That's right. Yeah.
It's fine. It's no big deal.
Construction manager, full-size pickup. Yes. So, so the point is that before the green code, to renovate this building, you would have had to have at least, let's say, 30 parking spaces. And that's really the equivalent of 1 to 2 houses that would need to be torn down just to accommodate the parking needs. And that's why you see this like weird growth where you get a big building and then a big parking lot, big building, big parking lot. With the green code, we're trying to stop that, and we're done with that. And that's really important to say out loud. And I think, the legacy shop provision, back to Deb's Hall, you couldn't do that because there's also not parking there, right? So it's really important how these things are intertwined. You want to talk about Coatesworth?
Sure. So this is the Coatesworth Mansion. It's located at 49 Cottage Street. It's a project I did a handful of years ago now. I remember the first time I saw this building, my sister lived in an apartment next door, and I went to go see her new place and was just kind of shocked and in awe that this gorgeous mansion existed in an otherwise like lovely but not street full of mansions. And it was a little rough. The first time I saw it, it was rough. A family had definitely loved it and given it the best that they could, but it needed a lot of work. It's a huge, huge house. I think it's about 10,000 square feet, 10 or 12, I think. 3 stories with the turret. There's obviously so much intricacy there. And I love to preserve historic places, but this was a challenge to figure out because the construction costs were so high that it was difficult to figure out a plan for this building that generated enough future income to justify the cost of construction. And so we really need to figure out how to maximize this building's utility. At the time it was purchased, it was 4 units, the first floor, the second floor, and then 2 apartments on the third. And that just didn't make enough money. They were huge apartments, and we couldn't figure out how to give this building everything it needed and retain those 4 units. So 4 ended up becoming 10. And that really was only possible because 10 units, this was just after the Green Code passed. I think it was late 2017. I was working on this project, 2018. And it wouldn't have been, making 10 units wouldn't have been possible because we had no ability to provide parking. The backyard of this property was landlocked. There was no access to the street. So even though there was a yard, we couldn't figure out how to make it a parking lot. So ultimately, this massive construction project and huge restoration, you can see in the lower photo with the kitchen island, that was originally the home's like big front parlor. And then when it was a convent, it was like, there was like an altar in there and stuff. It became a 1-bedroom apartment. So with 10 units, we were able to justify the construction costs. We didn't have to create a parking lot in order to get through the approval phase. The only thing that we needed was a small variance for fire code related density issues, because with so many units, we were too close to the property next door. We were able to get that variance, and we were able to make a really beautiful building that was renovated to historic standards and supports itself, hopefully for another 100 years. In the end, we were able to eventually provide parking by making a deal with our neighbor to access the backyard. But that was only possible once the project was complete and generating income, and we had a fresh set of funds and like a fresh brain to give kind of like creative energy to that portion of the project. So 10 units that didn't require parking to get through the approval phases, and now it's an operating building that should support itself long term.
Yeah, and historic tax credit, right?
Yes.
Historic,
Yep.
yes. And in Allentown, so high standards, as we know. And
Yeah.
this is a great project. And this is one of so many examples that exist around the city now, that because the Green Code has changed. And so if you're out there, if you're working in real estate or thinking about working in real estate, a lot of people are often afraid, I think, of, working in the city or old buildings, but this has really allowed, there's so much flexibility now, right? You don't have to have a parking lot. You don't have to buy the historic building next door to tear it down. And that really is a big deal. And you're right on the density, right? There's actually, the density requirements have been lifted for the most part. And yeah, it's a great project.
Yeah.
Really great project.
And this got rented without, these were high value apartments that got rented without needing parking spots provided to those tenants.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Hold on. One more. Why is my thing not? Oh, there we go. All right. So we're on to the third and final thing that we wanted to talk today about implementation, which is the adaptive reuse permit process. So what people may not realize is if you have a very historic structure in Buffalo, like our churches, our grain elevators, our like all these like really kind of cool old buildings that we don't know really what to do with. We in the Buffalo Green Code, there is what's called an adaptive reuse permit. And that means that if you, one of the 16 churches that are closing right now, or any of the many that have closed, if you're a historic building locally landmarked or on the National Register, you can apply for adaptive reuse permit, which means basically that you can do anything you want inside the building, as long as it doesn't bother the exterior. And there's rules, but that's basically what it is you can do what you want. So if you want to put a educational facility in the church, you can do that. This is zoning only. We're not talking about covenants from the Catholic diocese or any other church, okay? This is just zoning. But if you wanted to put a rock climbing gym, if you wanted to put apartments, you could put a brewery. Yes, you could with zoning. It would allow it, as long as you're not, working on the exterior, not making changes on the exterior. So you don't want to put a grain elevator tower or a grain silo on your front lawn, if you're doing something. But if you want to buy an old church or a historic grain elevator, I think about those all the time. This adaptive reuse permit works really well. And I have an example actually to show you, which is 198 Emsley, which is a project that we're working on through our stabilization program with Christina and Revi, the owners here. And this is a really great, like they bought this church, they're gonna bring it back to life. they've got apartments planned in the back, community space up front, and that would not be possible, again, without the parking, right? The removal of the parking requirements, which, but, and I maybe I should say this, most cities now are starting to remove minimum parking requirements, but they didn't do this in 2017. And we have been a leader around the country for removing parking. And this is why. So this church now becomes viable because it doesn't need a giant parking lot. And because of the adaptive reuse permit, they can apply, they can say, we're going to do a community space. Here's our plan. And boom, bam, you know,
Yeah.
it's not.
Yeah, and they're gonna get tax credits for this too, right?
Historic
They're gonna
tax credit.
historic tax credit, great.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's gonna be a beautiful feature in the community. It's gonna look great, and it's going to be something very useful.
And that was actually my final example for these three. I didn't put any other churches involved, but I did actually wanted just to say thank you. And were there any thoughts or things you'd like to add to this before we wrap up?
I'd just like to say that I think that, you know, I remember pre-2017 going to City Hall for my building permits and then being like, oh my God, I don't know what's gonna happen. The green code's coming, the green code's coming. Like it was this big scary thing. And what ultimately happened was that projects became so much easier in the historic preservation community because there are so many big buildings like these churches, like grain silos, like the Coatsworth Mansion, that are amazing opportunities to be beautiful architectural contributions, but also, you know, have a function that works really well for people, whether it's housing or a brewery.
Yeah.
And so I just think that the green code turned out to be really the best thing that could have happened to these to the type of work that we do and to our community ultimately. And I hope that people take this information and find new ways to apply it to the buildings that they love in their little corner of the city.
Yeah. And I wanted to say, you know, the other perks of the green code is, you know, from a builder and renovator perspective is it's a lot easier to get approvals now, right? It's very transparent. There's a 21-day-ish turnaround, you know, review. And if you have to go before the zoning board, I served on the zoning board for 9 years. If you have to go before it, at least you know the rules and what you're asking for. And that makes it actually easier when you're going to ask for variance. It doesn't mean you're going to get approved, but at least you understand what the rules are versus thousands of pages of copied pages of zoning code. And it was just really messy. So it's a lot easier. And then the other thing I think that we didn't touch on, we don't have photos on, but that most of the city is now legal. It's, you know, you can renovate an old carriage house legally, right? You can renovate a duplex legally. You used to have to get a variance to if your building was vacant, you would have had to get a variance.
Right.
And so now you don't have to do that. And I think we really people I think really underestimate the power of what zoning can do if it's done pretty well, you know. And so all the real estate folks out there, builders, people that are listening to this, I think it's really important to say, we'll take a look at those legacy shops, find them, understand them, know that they can come back to life. If you see some of these old churches and you think, oh, these are gone, you know, don't think that
Don't write 'em
actually.
off.
Yeah, don't write them off. Yeah, like they're definitely possible to renovate.
There's so much potential left.
So much potential, and it just requires creative thinking. And if you need that creative thinking and that help, Haley and I are actually here for you. Like we're happy to walk through a building. That's our job at PDN. Our job at, you know, here is trying to keep buildings standing. And so I'll do, you know, whatever it takes.